All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming out on a snowy night. I really appreciate your interest in this corridor study. My name is John Wiggin. I am the consultant project manager with HDR, and I have about a 40 to 45-minute presentation to introduce many of the preliminary concepts that have been developed to date for the US 14 bypass corridor study. And first things, a couple housekeeping items. If you did not get a chance to sign in, please sign in before you leave. If you leave your contact information, we'll make sure to add you to the mail and emailing list for future notifications and study updates. Also at the table is a comment card and informational handout with information on the overall corridor study as well as tonight's meeting. Everything you see here with the display boards, the informational handout, copy of the presentation, as well as a recording of the presentation will all be posted to the website. So don't worry about taking pictures or anything like that. All this will be available on the website by the end of the day tomorrow. Meeting format, we do have this introductory presentation. So if you do have questions and comments, please save those to the end. At the conclusion of the presentation, we'll break back out into the open house format. A number of people from the study advisory team are here to answer your questions and have discussion on anything you see here in the room. Various methods provide feedback on what you see here tonight. Comment cards, you can submit comments directly through the study website. You can also reach out to any of the study contacts through email, phone, mail, really what's ever most convenient for you. The one thing we do ask that we receive all comments back by December 10th. That allows us to move into the next phase of the study. So the purpose of today's meeting, really twofold. And the first one is to kind of just provide a brief overview and study update. Bulk of the presentation here tonight is presenting preliminary concepts for your feedback. And one thing I really want to make clear here is at this point in the study where we're at, there are no recommendations. That essentially everything here that you see today is on the table. That all these concepts represent kind of the culmination of the brainstorming phase of this corridor study. So essentially, everything we heard from, transportation issues and needs that we needed to address as part of this corridor study, those are reflected in many of the concepts that you see here tonight. So with regard to feedback that we're looking for from you all is, kind of 3 example questions here. Is there something that we didn't address? Is there something that maybe we missed that is, important to you or what you see along the corridor? What do you like or not like with a specific concept? We'd like to know. We can make refinements moving forward. And what would you add or remove to a concept to make it better? That sometimes you see a concept that maybe it's 90% there, and maybe just with one little tweak that makes it slam dunk. Those are the things that would really help us as we continue the corridor study and refining these concepts moving forward. So study team, study contacts, again, myself, John Wiggin with HDR. Steve Graham, who's in the back, he is the DOT project manager. At the onset of the study, that the DOT organized the study advisory team. It's made up of members from the DOT, Federal Highway Administration, City of Brookings, and the City of Volga. Essentially, their role is to help guide the study through completion. And also the DOT retains the services of the consulting firm HDR, and we're helping the DOT deliver the study. So the study area, what we're looking at is the US 14 bypass corridor. It extends from the US 14, US 81 intersection to the west, just south of Arlington, east here through Volga, along the US 14 bypass to that US 14 bypass east intersection on the east side of Brookings. Just want to be clear that in the Brookings area, we're not looking at 6th Street or US 14 corridor through Brookings. We're strictly focused on the US 14 bypass in that area. So the overarching study goal is to develop a long-range plan for the US 14 bypass corridor. We're not doing design, we're not developing construction plans as part of this study. We're looking at the long-range needs and that long-range plan for this corridor. And essentially that we're looking to answer 2 primary questions. And the first one is what improvements are needed over the next 20 to 30 years? And then what is the timeline for those improvements? That we recognize some of the things that we show here may be needed here in the next 5 to 10 years, while others are really, they're out there kind of in that 30-year time frame, closer to 2050. So taking that information that we will be developing a plan for implementation, And ultimately, that will be a guide for the DOT for scheduling future projects as we move forward. So a couple key components of the plan. First and foremost, and really the primary driver for this study, is US 14 bypass 22nd Avenue intersection. I'm sure many of you are aware of the operational and safety challenges at that intersection with growing traffic volumes. With that, the DOT does have a planned project at that intersection, fiscal year 2024. Essentially, that represents the first bigger long-range project coming out of this corridor study. Essentially, that's the build-out to address operational and safety needs for that next 20 to 30 years and beyond. Also looking at configurations, the I-29 US 14 bypass interchange. Also looking at the corridor number of lanes and access throughout the corridor, including intersection improvements at nearly all the major intersections here through the corridor. And then also we're looking at environmental overview. Essentially, with all these concepts that we developed, we'll look at those from an environmental side of things to start to get an idea of the potential environmental impacts of implementation of some of those concepts. So from a study schedule standpoint, from a timeline perspective, we're right in the middle of the study. From a phase or task-based look at the schedule, we're just wrapping up the second phase of this study. The first one was gathering information, doing the preliminary analysis, identifying those transportation issues and needs that we're looking at as part of this corridor study. And the culmination of that first phase was that initial public meeting that we had this summer. That moved us into the second phase, and that's where we begin to develop these brainstorming or high-level concepts that you see here tonight. And this public meeting that we have tonight, the public meeting we had last time in Brookings, and a number of stakeholder meetings throughout both days. Really, we're looking for your feedback on the concepts developed, and that allows us to move into the third phase, where we can go into further refinement to the concepts, do more detailed analysis, and we start putting the pieces together. As you can see, a lot of the concepts are really focused on an intersection by intersection basis. And this next phase allows us to start bringing those together. And we're looking at things more in terms of corridor segments, where you got your typical section number of lanes, plus your intersection improvements, and we can do further analysis and evaluation of those. So at the end of that phase, kind of gets into that fourth phase that you see there. We can begin to screen those feasible scenarios, develop preliminary recommendations, start to draft the report, and that's where we'll come back for our third and final public meeting sometime in that spring 2020 timeframe. Following that public meeting, final two phases where we can finalize recommendations, finalize reports, and ultimately submit those reports at the end of June 2020. So with that, I'd like to move into the preliminary concept side of things for this presentation. And this is the order I'm going to follow here, kind of working through the corridor. We're going to start at the US 14 bypass and discuss some of the corridor typical section concepts, essentially looking at the number of through lanes through the bypass corridor, also looking at some intersection interchange concepts. From there, we'll move to the US 14 bypass west and east intersections, and then we'll move west here in US 14 Volga. We have a slide on US 14 west of Volga, and then a concluding slide with a few additional concepts that we've developed. One thing I do want to point out is that this presentation does not include all concepts built for the study. Essentially, if we were going to walk through each one individually, it'd probably be here an hour and a half. So I'm just kind of hitting some of the highlights, potentially some of the extremes of the range of different concepts. So if you do see things that maybe we missed or you have additional questions or comments, I'll refer you to the boards during the open house portion for that. So starting with the US 14 bypass through the Brookings area, we certainly heard a number of needs related to the benefits and desire for additional lanes through the corridor. Not going to go through each one individually, but moving to the typical sections, and because of that, we're moving forward with three primary concepts for typical sections. Essentially, this is the foundation of the number of lanes through the bypass. And the first concept we're looking at is essentially maintaining what's out there right now, with an existing 3-lane section, a single through lane in each direction, plus a center left turn lane. And then from there, we have two concepts that looks at additional lanes. And the first one is what we call a 4-lane divided with the raised median concept. There's a picture of that in the top right. Essentially, that has multiple lanes in each direction, a raised median between the major intersections, and then this instance, shoulder and curb and gutter would also be potential components with that section. The other multi-lane concept is a 5-lane with continuous center left turn lane. And that would be very similar to how Medaria was striped a few years ago. Essentially 2 lanes, through lanes in each direction. But instead of that raised median between the primary intersections, there'd be a continuous left turn lane, very similar to what's out there today. So all 3 of these typical sections would include a potential shared use path. You'll see that in many of the figures. We have a dashed blue line that runs on the south side of the bypass. Applicable speeds for these corridors would be in that range of 45 to 55 miles an hour. And then one thing to really keep in mind is that across these 3 different typical sections, they can be applied singularly, essentially that we can apply one of these typical sections across the entire bypass, very similar to how it is right now with a single through lane in each direction. Or there's the option too of potentially maybe west of I-29 where the volumes are significantly higher. Maybe that's where the multi-lane section goes. And then to the east where it's much lower traffic and a different type of traffic, maybe a 3-lane section is more applicable there. So there's something to keep in mind as we go through the intersection concepts. You're just going to see a wide variety of how these are applied. Just keeping in mind that they can be applied interchangeably, in terms of overall segments in the bypass. So with that, I'm going to walk through the bypass from Western Avenue and head east and just touch on a couple of the intersection improvements at each of these primary intersections. And the first one is Western Avenue. And from an identified needs that we're looking to address, really related to traffic operations and safety, as well as future development north of Brookings. That, as Brookings they're maxing out their localized developable area, once they kind of max that out, they've identified their future growth areas to the north, in particular, north, kind of to the northwest of Brookings, so 469th Avenue, Western Avenue, Medaria Avenue, could be very important corridors to reach that development to the north. So essentially, we're looking at building out these intersections, presenting concepts that build out the intersections to address that future growth potential here over the next 30 years. This one is an example of a 5-lane section through the intersection. You see the yellow, that's the proposed needs for additional pavement. And really, we're focused on building out the north and the south legs, adding turn lanes in this intersection. So really nothing too significant or crazy note at this intersection, really just setting it up for the long-term traffic and safety needs here. Moving east to Medaria Avenue, needs we're looking to address really related to traffic operations and safety. And this is that first intersection, that's kind of getting to that blend of both the daily traffic volumes and the operational and safety needs from a daily perspective, but also on the event traffic management side of things. This is kind of that key western intersection, particular for SDSU football games. It certainly sees a lot of demand entering the next city in the area for those events. So the concept summary, really what we've developed is, maintaining the existing infrastructure and making adjustments as needed. As mentioned before, we used to have be striped as continuous 2 through lanes in each direction. So that's already in place. The north and south lanes are built out for 2 continuous through lanes, north-south directions. That's in place. So really, flexible with the different corridor concepts that we're looking at, essentially just adding turn lanes as needed and maintaining the existing infrastructure in the area. So moving east to Stadium Road and Jackrabbit Avenue intersections, and the needs looking to address here, really focused on the event and traffic management side of things. That the turning traffic at both these intersections on a daily perspective is considerably less than many of the other intersections along the bypass. So certainly a consideration as we're looking through the concepts. A lot of these are, looking at how do we address event traffic management, essentially help the folks out that are guiding traffic into and out of the area for those events. So essentially the concepts look at build out of intersections with a mix of intersection access treatments. The one that's shown right here is maintaining the existing 3-lane section that's out there. So really not a lot, changed on US 14 bypass. But on the south side, you can see the Stadium Road and Jackrabbit Avenue legs of the intersection are widened out. Essentially, that is to help them from an event traffic management standpoint, increasing the functionality of those legs, where essentially, instead of just one lane coming in for the arrival times, potentially allowing 2 lanes of traffic in side by side, with the goal of removing that queuing and storage of traffic off of the bypass and getting them onto the side street to improve safety and operations and reliability on the bypass itself. So looking at potential configurations where we're looking at multiple lanes on the bypass, here's a concept that looks at where Jackrabbit Avenue is a full access intersection. If an intersection here in this area were to meet signal warrants at some time in the future, that would occur at Jackrabbit Avenue in line with the DOT's current access classification for the bypass. And then at Stadium Road, we show a 3/4 access. And essentially what that does, it allows all movements into Stadium Road. So you're heading westbound, you could turn left, eastbound, you can turn right. But exiting Stadium Road, everyone would have to turn right. You would not be able to turn left out of Stadium Road and head westbound at that intersection. Those folks would have to turn right and then at a downstream location make a U-turn. And really the reason for that is from a safety perspective, that you see significant safety benefits when you can eliminate those left turn movements out of the side street on an instance like this, where you have a very high speed, potentially high volume roadway that you're turning left onto. By essentially making those folks turn right and make a U-turn downstream really does a very good job of reducing the high severity angle crashes from those turning movements. Then taking that one step further, this concept looks at 3/4 access at both Stadium Road and Jackrabbit Avenue. Essentially in this one, similar to the last one at Stadium Road, you turn right. If you want to head westbound, you make your U-turn at Jackrabbit Avenue. On those drivers at Jackrabbit Avenue wishing to head west would turn right. And in this instance, we show a potential U-turn just west of 22nd Avenue. You could also make your U-turn at 22nd Avenue. One thing to note that we do show a potential internal connection between Stadium Road and Jackrabbit Avenue. Just the location with that is illustrative. We've been in conversations with DOT of potential locations that something like that might go. Essentially that reflects some sort of, there's a benefit of making that connection internally between Stadium Road and Jackrabbit Avenue, both from a daily traffic perspective as well as an event traffic perspective. So moving to the east, 22nd Avenue intersection. If you're at the last public meeting, I mentioned that there is a planned DOT project at that intersection potentially for this fall or this coming spring. Unfortunately, that project did not go. They have repackaged the improvements at that intersection with this recent 6th Street / US 14 reconstruction project that's going to be going this summer. And the plans are that here sometime late spring, early summer, a traffic signal will be installed at that intersection as well as a northbound right turn lane. The plan is then that traffic signal would stay in place until that 2024 project, that major build out of the intersection that's planned for 2024. So just keep in mind the signal's coming, planned for the summer for construction, and then the plan is that it will stay there until that future project in 2024. So they're looking at the long-term, kind of that future build-out needs at the 22nd Avenue intersection. Needs to address, traffic operations and safety, both from a daily traffic and event traffic management, as well as looking at some of the access points, those driveways within that intersection area surrounding 22nd Avenue. So with that, we have a number of concepts that look at the potential build-out options of the intersection, and they incorporate varying degrees of access management. So here's an example with the 3-lane section that's out there right now. You can see not a lot of new pavement, which is shown in the yellow, really setting up the north and south legs of 22nd Avenue for future development and addressing the existing traffic volumes that are out there. But really not a whole lot done along the US 14 bypass itself. This one is really geared strictly at meeting operational and safety goals from a daily traffic perspective. And then taking that a little step further, looking at one of the multi-lane corridors here. This one is that 4-lane divided section with the blue raised median. You can see kind of the build out of the intersection and number of lanes, adding turn lanes on many of the approaches. And one of the things that this one does, when you're looking at that access management within the intersection functional area, that with that raised median, it essentially restricts driveway access. Those on the north, that would essentially be right in, right out. So those wishing that would be turning left out of those driveways, similar to 3/4 axis, they would have to turn right and then make a U-turn at some sort of the downstream intersections. And then taking the access management one step further, here is a concept that essentially shifts the US 14 bypass alignment to the south, up against that southern right-of-way line. And the goal with that is providing spacing for frontage roads. So essentially all those access points will not have direct access to the bypass. They would have access to the frontage roads, and that would guide them towards a connection either on 22nd Avenue to the north or US 14 bypass to the west. And essentially those access points are well beyond the functional area of the intersection. So moving east to US 14 bypass and I-29 interchange, we've heard a number of needs at this location, ranging from traffic operations and safety. A lot of that has to do with the limitations of the narrow bridge, just with the single lanes in each direction, essentially limits the functionality of some of the things from an operations and safety standpoint. Another thing is the spacing between the interchange and 32nd Avenue. In particular, that eastbound ramp terminal intersection, which is the intersection with the northbound off-ramp and the northbound on-ramp on the east side. Currently, that spacing is 460 feet. Interchanges, we like to see that more in the 660 feet, both from Federal Highway Administration requirements, as well as that operational and safety benefits of trying to get that separation as much as we can to allow the turning movements at those intersections and those necessary turn lanes. So with a few of those things in mind, we developed a number of interchange configurations, looking at those specific needs. This first one that you see right here is essentially making a few improvements from a traffic operations standpoint. It's very difficult to see, but essentially it adds right turn lanes on the off-ramp approaches and kind of sets the intersections up for that future signalization and kind of channelizing those turn lanes. That being said, it does not address the bridge width through the interchange or the spacing on the east side. It remains 460 feet. So then a few different configurations here to walk through. The first one is a standard diamond configuration. You can see with the orange that represents a reconstructed bridge. On this instance, about 3 lanes wide, allows for left turn lanes between the 2 ramp terminal intersections. So from an operations and safety perspective, certainly a benefit there. But from an interchange to 32nd Avenue spacing, with the essentially matching the existing configuration that's out there, still at that 460 feet, and short of that desired 660 feet there. The middle interchange is a diverging diamond. From an operations and safety standpoint, these are very, very solid, very good. That being said, from the spacing side of things, it actually, based on this configuration, actually shortens it a little bit. So likely for implementation of an interchange concept like this, there'll likely be some sort of closure of the 32nd access or extending the median through that intersection. In this instance, that spacing is reduced down to around 370 feet. And then the one on the far right is a single point interchange. These are very common in metro areas. Several examples of these in the Sioux Falls area. And essentially, it brings all the left turning movements to a centralized intersection, in this case over the I-29 main lines. And from a spacing standpoint, the increase in that spacing between the major intersection and 32nd Avenue, this one by far achieves that. It's upwards of 900 feet separation, nearly double what's out there right now. A couple drawbacks with that is that still when you have that northbound off-ramp right turn, as well as the northbound on-ramp, that westbound right turn to the northbound on-ramp, your spacing is back close to that intersection. And one of the concerns with that is particularly like with that northbound right turn, if someone wishes to make a right turn and mean an immediate left at 32nd Avenue, you still have those weave issues darting across traffic due to that short spacing. So a couple drawbacks there. The other one is the overall size of the bridge. So you can see the structure is pretty significant, what's needed for a single point, and that raises the overall cost compared to many of these other concepts. So a couple other interchanges. These really building upon a diamond, standard diamond type configuration and focusing on increasing that separation between that eastern ramp terminal intersection and 32nd Avenue. The first one is a compressed diamond. And what that does is it brings the ramp terminal intersections in just a little bit more. You can kind of see where they are in relation to the existing. And the configuration shown up there, that gets you to about 600 feet. So we're getting closer to that desired 660 feet. The middle one is what we call a tight diamond. Essentially, that brings the ramp terminal intersections into a spacing of about 200 to 400 feet apart. And with the configuration we show here, that gets you to around 760 feet, which exceeds that 660 feet that's desired. That being said, a couple drawbacks to the tight diamond. One of those is the need for retaining walls. Just with it being that tight up with I-29, you're certainly going to need some sort of vertical retaining wall, and those can be pretty costly. There's also some concern with the area of essentially being a maintenance headache through this area, that, particularly with where this interchange is located, northwest, the northern part of Brookings, you get the northwest winds coming in during snowstorms like this. So instead of the snow dropping out, hopefully between the ramp and the I-29 main line, you have the tight diamond, you create a valley, and you likely have more issues with snow dropping out of the wind right there at the I-29 main line. So with a couple of those considerations, we also created a final concept that looks at a modified tight diamond. And essentially, on the east side, your ramp terminal intersection is reflective of a tight diamond, achieving that 760 feet of separation. Then on the west side, the ramp terminal intersection is located more in line with the standard diamond or compressed diamond. And hopefully with that, the goal is that the snow would drop out of the wind between the ramps and the I-29 main line instead of over the I-29 main line. So those are the concepts we developed for the interchange. From there, moving to the 32nd and 34th Avenue intersection areas. And some of the needs we're looking to address here are certainly different from a traffic perspective than what we see on the west side of the bypass. That as you move through the interchange to 32nd Avenue, to 34th Avenue, volumes continue to decrease as you move east. That being said, there's certainly a lot of truck traffic here at the 32nd and 34th Avenue intersections that are a consideration moving forward with some of these concepts. Similarly, that mentioned before, the 460 feet separation between the interchange and 32nd Avenue. Some of these concepts reflect some scenarios where we're looking to address that distance here on the corridor instead of at the interchange. And some of the concepts also reflect some of the access management. So this first one here is, kind of more reflective that if there are adjustments at the interchange, we can achieve the 660 feet. And this one shows 32nd Avenue full access as well as 34th Avenue full access. And then between those major intersections would be some sort of raised median shown in this configuration. So essentially any remaining driveways between 32nd and 34th would be right in, right out with downstream U-turn options. So that's kind of one end of the spectrum of maintaining full access, 32nd Avenue, 34th Avenue. And then going to the other side from an access management standpoint is essentially closing all access points from the interchange heading east to 34th Avenue. Essentially that would cul-de-sac 32nd Avenue, provide some local connections via 33rd Avenue. That would be new, that's not out there right now in this area. And then the full access intersection would be 34th Avenue. So essentially all traffic from this industrial area would be carried to 34th Avenue to a single full access intersection via future local network connections. And we have concepts that show kind of where those potential east-west and north-south connections could occur in conjunction with a concept like this. So this is one that we have a number of concepts drawn up for 32nd Avenue and 34th Avenue. But certainly if you do have additional questions, I'd point you to the back boards for those during the open house. So moving west, US 14 bypass west interchange area. In this area, one of the primary drivers for the creation of various concepts is related to the structure age. That US 14 coming out of Brookings over the top of the US 14 bypass. That structure was built in 1970. So essentially, that replacement is going to be needed sometime here within this study's planning horizon. So at that point, the question is, well, what are we going to need? Is it an at-grade intersection, maintain existing interchange configuration, maybe a potential interchange configuration? So that really opens this area up to looking at all sorts of concepts. A couple of the other needs in the area is that the existing interchange does not facilitate all movements. It also really doesn't offer much connectivity. There's some safety and operational challenges for future Brookings growth to the north, particularly 469th Avenue is going to be a primary corridor. That's going to lead to, or essentially exacerbate, some of the operational and safety concerns in that interchange area, 469th Avenue and a number of the access points. There's a crash history there, a few different locations. You have certainly a lot of conflicts with turning traffic, slowing traffic, accelerating traffic, traffic turning lanes, all occurring in a very short distance in this area. So the concepts developed here incorporate various means of access management, intersection concepts, interchange concepts, as well as some 469th Avenue connectivity concepts in the area. The figure that you see up here is kind of more of that short range access management side of things. Essentially, if that interchange stays as it is. The light green to the west, potential frontage and backage connections. And then that light blue heading off to the east is a potential 469th Avenue alignment, essentially moving all those turning movements east of the interchange and decreasing those conflicts between the interchange and 469th Avenue. A couple of the intersection concepts in the area. The one on the left essentially extends US 14 coming out of Brookings over to the 469th Avenue intersection. It ties everything into that single point at 469th Avenue. From there, there'd be access management along the bypass as well as other connections in the area. The intersection you see on the right is essentially putting an at-grade intersection where the existing interchange is. And then the connection to 469th Avenue would occur somewhere off to the north and to the west. And that's kind of reflective of the inset you see there on the top left of that graphic. Just some potential alignments that we've been discussing for an intersection at that location. And then looking at a few of the interchange concepts, this one is essentially building upon a configuration that's out there, but really focuses on more, making it more of like an interchange instead of that westbound movement coming into a stop sign before entering US 14 and heading west. This would bring it in more like a typical interchange where you'd merge onto westbound US 14. There'd need to be significant access management in the area, and that's where you see the frontage road to the north of there. There'd also need to be some sort of 469th Avenue connection somewhere on the bypass or US 14 to the west that we don't show here. So there's a lot of pieces to this one, a lot of local network improvements that would be needed. It also does not provide for all movements in the future. You'd still be limited primarily to the west and into Brookings, but not accomplish the all movements goal. So here's a couple other interchange configurations, really focusing on accommodating all movements, as well as tying in 469th Avenue. The one to the left, the standard diamond configuration, extending 469th off to the northwest. Again, accommodates all movements. And then the one on the right is a partial cloverleaf. And really the goal with this one is to focus on the high volume movements and not require them to stop within the interchange. Particularly that westbound US 14 to westbound 14 coming out of Brookings towards Volga, instead of having to turn left at an intersection. In this instance, there would be a loop ramp where they could fall on the loop ramp and then merge on US 14 heading west. And then a few concepts at the US 14 bypass east intersection needs to address here. Not so much from a significant traffic growth, but a couple of them, related to kind of the truck turns. The first one is the intersection angle, eastbound and northbound left turn. There's some off tracking, in the turn lanes or off towards the edge of the pavement. Also, there's some desire to add a southbound to eastbound left turn acceleration. So essentially trucks making that movement would be able to turn into an acceleration lane, get up to speed, and then merge into US 14 and continue eastbound. And then we do acknowledge that, yeah, there is certainly going to be some traffic growth. We don't expect that to be, too high compared to some of the other locations along the bypass. We certainly recognize that there's communities growing off to the east, and really setting this intersection up long term to accommodate that growth. So with that, the concepts look at a variety of options from more of a rural type intersection to more of an urban type intersection. And the one you see here is kind of right in the middle. It's looking at the existing configuration, makes some of those adjustments for the turning traffic, and sort of sets it up for future signalization when warranted at some point here in the future. So then here's the two concepts looking at more of that rural approach. The one on the left has more of the sweeping right turns at the intersection, and then the left turns are all brought in tight at more of a perpendicular angle with US 14 and the bypass. And then the east or the right concept is more of an urban type intersection where essentially all turns are turned into a single point at that location. All right, so I'd like to jump now all the way out here to US 14 and Volga. We have a couple concepts to go through here. And some of the needs we're looking to address here are future development and traffic growth. And a lot of this, not so much on US 14 itself, that, the 5-lane section that's out there right now has, ample capacity to accommodate quite a bit of traffic growth through the area of Volga. A lot of this is related to the side street approaches and just looking at some of those intersection turning movements. Also look at managing access. There's a number of access points, particularly on the north side, through many areas here in the Volga area. Looking at side street approach widths, there's been some concerns at some of the locations of trucks turning onto a property, off tracking into turn lanes, those sorts of things. Just the widths are fairly narrow. They're not able to complete those turns within the pavement. And then also looking at a few of the potential bicycle and pedestrian routes along US 14 and between Volga and Brookings. So the concepts we developed looked at various intersection improvements, as well as some alternative access and bicycle and pedestrian facilities in the area. And the first one here is at Samara Avenue. A couple of intersection concepts here related to addressing some of the traffic and safety issues at this intersection. First one, from a traffic standpoint, I certainly expect that Samara Avenue traffic turning onto and off of, as well as crossing US 14 to continue to increase with future development. So a lot of that's with both of these, looking at building out both of those approaches with turn lanes to accommodate that future traffic. But also from a safety standpoint, and as you're aware, the west side of the intersection, it's a single through lane in each direction. Heading into Volga, you're coming in on a single through lane, opens up to a left turn lane. But then on the east side of the intersection, you have the 2 lanes. So from an operation standpoint, someone that's looking to turn, go from northbound and turn right and head east, more into Volga, when someone's coming eastbound, you don't know what lane they're going to pick. So are they going to stay in that leftmost lane, or are they going to dart through the intersection to that right lane? So essentially, from a functionality standpoint, there's limitations there. So that's one thing that we'd like to address. And that's why in the concept there to the left, essentially what that does kind of clears up some of that ambiguity. That northbound to eastbound right turn movement would now enter into a lane add situation. There would be a raised island. You can see there in the dark blue. So essentially someone heading east into Volga would stay in that left lane. That island would keep them in that left turn lane, and someone going northbound to eastbound would be able to make a free right turn into that lane add and continue eastbound. The concept there on the right, essentially it extends the 5-lane section further west. So essentially, by the time US 14 gets to the Samara Avenue intersection, It's built out to the existing configuration, the 5-lane section through there. So not only does that kind of help with the operations and safety for that eastbound traffic, but also for the westbound traffic. There's been many instances noted, essentially traffic trying to cut across someone right there as it merges down to a single lane just west of the intersection. That's a pretty tight spot. There's been some concerns with that. Essentially, this extends things further west and then merges down further west of the intersection. And then we have one other concept here in the Samara Avenue area, and that is potentially with a rearage road. There's a number of access points on the north side of US 14 just east of Samara Avenue. One option from an access management standpoint would be to provide a rearage connection where some of those access points could potentially be removed from US 14 and placed up to that rearage connection, essentially reduce the number of conflicts that you see with turning traffic on US 14. Moving east to Ancina Avenue, from an operations perspective, in terms of additional lanes, really what we show here is an eastbound right turn lane. A couple benefits there. It removes turning traffic from the through lanes, but also potentially if there is a train crossing the tracks, it allows for storage of queuing traffic that's wishing to turn right. That allows them to stop and wait for the train in that right turn lane instead of having to do that in the eastbound through lanes. Ancina Avenue has also been identified as an important pedestrian crossing location. So that's something from a pedestrian crossing standpoint to be monitored. We note that this is a location for potential signalized intersection when warranted. Just kind of where the volumes are at right now, this would likely be that next location that when volumes do get to a certain point, the signal would be warranted, and this would likely be where that next signal could be installed. That as well, some signalized benefits as well, pedestrian traffic, looking to the future. And then moving east to Caspian Avenue, from an operations standpoint, we note, you can see on the southern leg, adding a northbound right turn lane through the crossing up to the intersection, and then building out that northern leg of the Caspian Avenue in preparation for future development. Essentially, this concept shows what that leg could look like as that area north US 14 were to begin developing. Then we'll touch on a little bit here what we're looking at US 14 west of Volga. Essentially, what we're doing is we're looking at the number of lanes that's needed through this stretch, essentially from west of Volga over to the 4-lane section near US 14 81 intersection. We're currently in the analysis phase of this. We have a board over there that's pretty data intensive. So if this is an area that interests you, by all means, get a hold of one of us from the state advisory team during the open house, and we can walk through that board. But essentially what we're doing is we're looking at 3 different typical sections through this area. And the first one is maintaining the 2-lane highway that's out there right now, plus intersection improvements. We have a number of boards that have some of those intersection improvements. Another concept we're looking at is a 2-lane highway with passing lanes, also referred to as a Super 2. An example of that is shown here on the screen, where you can see 2 lanes in one direction, a single lane in the other direction. One of those lanes on the multi-lane direction is a passing lane. Essentially what that does, it adds incremental passing lane locations around 2 miles in length. In this instance, potentially 1 or 2 passing lanes along this segment. It allows traffic to pass the slower traffic in these passing lanes instead of trying to make the more risky maneuvers and pass someone into oncoming traffic. Then the third concept we're looking at is a multi-lane, 4-lane divided, which is very similar to a lot of the rural 4-lane divided cross sections you see here in South Dakota. Pretty similar to what you see here between Volga and Brookings. So, like I said, we're still in the analysis phase with this, but if you do have any questions, by all means, please let us know in the open house portion. And then finally, there's a number of other concepts that I didn't touch on here tonight. Like I said, there's a few intersections with turn lane improvements noted, including 458th Avenue, 459th Avenue, 466th Avenue. We also have a board that shows an initial interpretation of planned improvements at the US 14, US 81 intersection. DOT has a project plan that essentially brings the alignment of the eastbound, westbound lanes in tight through the intersection. There's been some safety concerns there that they're looking to address for that project. That's planned out, kind of not more that 4 to 5 year time frame out from today. We also have a few different boards related to ITS, including potential locations, dynamic message signs on the bypass, potential locations for cameras, as well as advanced warning at the 2 railroad crossings here within the study area. We have a couple different boards looking at pedestrian bicycle routes, both through Volga along the north side of Volga, as well as potential connections between Brookings and Volga. And then one board we don't have, we didn't develop. We also looked at blowing snow. We did blowing snow analysis and review throughout the corridor, and a couple of locations that were identified for potential implementation of snow fence, was between kind of that 457th Avenue to 459th Avenue. So that was also something we looked at here. So with that, before we conclude here, next steps, compile feedback that received, at all these stakeholder meetings, public meeting last night in Brookings, public meeting tonight. So by all means, please, if you have some comments, let us know on the concepts you see here tonight. Following that, we'll move into the next phase where we begin to refine concepts, identify feasible scenarios, essentially start grouping all these concepts together into more longer corridor segments and complete the detailed analysis. And then we'll be back around spring 2020 timeframe, present feasible scenarios for your feedback before wrapping up the study. So with that, just want to thank everyone for your time. I know this gets pretty long. We have a lot of content, a lot of concepts. It's a very lengthy corridor, very diverse corridor. So by all means, if you have questions and comments, please reach out to us before you leave here tonight. Also, if you think of stuff after the meeting, reach out to myself or Steve Graham, email, phone, whatever is most convenient for you. So with that, just like to thank everyone, appreciate your time, and at this point we'll break to the open house. So thank you.